a ministry that will sift through all of the social media noise to show you news of importance from the Most High's perspective. As watchmen, we are here both to warn of dangers and give biblical answers for dwelling in the secret place of the Most High during these times of confusion. Tell your family and friends to like, share, and subscribe as we delve into what Yahweh has for us, the apple of his eye. Let's get to work. Say shalom to everyone. We're going to continue with our Bible study. We're in the book of Romans in the first chapter. So we'll do a quick review. And actually, before we do the quick review, we're going to read Romans chapter 1, starting at verse 18. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of the Most High is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of Yahuwah is manifest in them, for Yahuwah has showed it to them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew the Most High, they glorified not as the Most High, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible Elohim into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore Yahuwah also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of the Most High into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. From verses 18 through 25. So we ask the Father for his blessing and guidance on this study as we enter into it, knowing that he has a word for us, his people, in Yeshua's name. So let's look at the book of Romans. We're again in Romans chapter 1. And although we didn't talk about it last time in great detail, we do want to mention in general several study points and points of information. First of all, Romans was written by the Apostle Paul to believers, and he wrote it between 54 and 58 CE, which is Common Era. He wrote it to both segments of believers in the Messiah. He wrote it to Jews and he wrote it to Gentiles. The purpose was to convince them that the gospel was for the Jew as well as the Greek. His primary target of ministry in this book was Gentiles, but he always sought out his own people in every place that he ministered. And in the case of Rome, neither group was dominating in the congregation in the congregations that received his epistle. Now, the reason why it's said that his primary target of ministry was Gentiles is the fact that the Apostle Paul, once he was converted and began ministering the blessings that the Most High had given him, he was in contact with other Hebrew Israelites. And by the way, we have to continue to remind ourselves that everyone, whether you're talking about in the Tanakh or whether you're talking about in what we call the New Testament, was a part of the children of Yasharel, the Hebrew Israelites. So, and certainly Paul, or Shaul, which is his Hebrew name, was also from that lineage. And so most of the the Hebrews that were Yasharel, the disciples who then became apostles, did their ministry work among, as Yeshua described it, the lost sheep of the house of Yasharel. Paul, however, even though he was one of those, was told by the Spirit to go to places where the people who would receive his message were primarily not of the house of Yasharel, but they were what we call Gentiles. So his primary targeted audience was the Gentiles. But whenever Paul went to a city, he always looked for his own people first, and he always preached first to his own people. And that we can find throughout the book of Acts. So when we get to the book of Romans, it's the same idea. Now, the issue with Romans is in the case of the Romans, the Apostle Paul was not he who ministered first to the people in Rome. He was sending a letter to them, but the work had already preceded him. The work of the gospel had already preceded him. We're not told who brought the gospel to Rome necessarily, but we are told that it wasn't Paul. Okay. So he was writing to a group of believers who had already accepted the gospel. That becomes really important when we understand some of the truths that we're going to see as we continue going through the book of Romans, because in many cases, when Paul, I'll say it in this way, in every case, when Paul is preaching to the brethren in Rome, all of them that he was preaching to had already surrendered themselves to the gospel. They had already been baptized. They had already received the blessing of the Spirit. Okay, so when he is speaking, he's not speaking to he might be speaking to unconverted people, but he's not speaking to people who don't know anything about the gospel or who don't know anything about Jesus. That's really important, because a lot of scriptures from Romans are used as conversion scriptures for unbelievers. They were not intended for unbelievers. These scriptures are intended for people who were already a part of the kingdom, who had already done the things that everybody else that came into the kingdom had to do. So when people pick and choose Bible verses that support a doctrine that is not consistent with the teaching of the real gospel, that's a problem. So one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we understand the audience as well as the message. So wanted to spend a couple of minutes on that. Okay, so again, the primary teaching was around that which brought both groups, what groups? The Jews and the Gentiles that were living in Rome and were a part of this group of believers. He was preaching words that were targeting both of those segments of the body of the Messiah. Body being talked about the called out ones, the ecclesia, and certainly the terminology that most people are familiar with, the church. Okay, but the church is not a religious organization, and he wasn't talking to people who were in a religious organization. He was talking to people who had responded to the gospel. Okay, so his primary words of encouragement, his primary exhortation was centered around bringing both those groups together, because as human beings, sometimes there were conflicts, okay, and points of view that Paul had to address. That is the general purpose of Romans. It's bringing all believers, regardless of how they got into the body, to a point of being considered and considering themselves a part of a body that was larger than their perspective. Okay, so we talked last time in terms of the nuggets that we could get from that. That's where he brought up the words of grace, the fact that he was bringing the news of the gift, which is the gospel, this good message, and the power that it has been given to those who receive the good message, and how the power to salvation comes from receiving that message. And it was to the Jews, certainly. It was also talking about how to be righteous. Now, what's not written here is that it's to the Jew and to the Greek. Okay, so and of course, all of that happens by faith. So we did talk about those words that are in blue, and the last one being obey, which is part and parcel of the gospel. You can't have a gospel without obedience to the gospel. Now, you can have the news, but you cannot be a recipient of the gospel if you're not obeying the gospel. That's why we ended up our study talking about James chapter 2, verse 20, that says faith without works is dead, being alone. Okay, so now we're going to continue. He talks about in verse 18, after he has laid that foundation, he said, Yah's wrath is revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness. Why is he talking about that? Because again, he's correcting a weakness in the congregation of people in Rome. Their weakness was they were going at each other. And in doing so, one group was thinking that they were more godly and righteous than the other. And so he brings to their attention in verse 18, the Most High's wrath is revealed against all ungodliness and all unrighteousness. So it doesn't matter whether you're a Jew or a Greek. If you're ungodly, if you're unrighteous, you're under the wrath of the Most High. So that's why that verse is there. And so when we look up the word wrath in the Greek, orge, it means a violent passion, but it also means to reach out for or to long for. And wrath is what the Most High has toward ungodliness and unrighteousness. So that violent passion, that reaching out, in other words, he is going to visit unrighteousness and ungodliness. And when he does so, and as he does so, it's regardless of your cultural frame of reference. See, that gets us back to what the earlier verses in Romans chapter 1 talk about. But what they're being told in verse 18 is you are no different than everybody else or than anyone else. Okay. If you're not right, you're underneath the Most High's wrath. You're underneath his wrath if you were a follower of the law, or you're underneath his wrath if you don't have the law of Moses, but you have that code of ethics that's inside of you. Regardless of where you are, if you're operating outside of his will, you're underneath his wrath. Okay. And that's what ungodliness is. Ungodliness is described as impiety or a disregard for, if you will, the righteousness of the Most High, even to the point of being defiant of the person of the Most High. Now, that's an important point, because ungodliness is directed at the personhood of the Most High, not just what the Most High says. So, in other words, ungodliness is a slap in the face of the Most High. Okay. Unrighteousness is how we treat that which is just. Remember last time we talked about what justification is. Okay, it's being lined up correctly. Okay, so unrighteousness means that we're not lined up correctly, and that therefore there's injustice rather than justice. That is a moral thing. It has to do with right and wrong, and basically it means not being right by the Most High's standard. So in verse 18, when it says, "For the wrath of the Most High is revealed against all ungodliness and all unrighteousness," now we see in the principal approach, where we look up the definition of the words that are used in Scripture, we see how that plays itself out and how we can understand the gravity of a verse like that. We know that wrath comes from heaven, and it's how the Father in heaven perceives all who are ungodly and unrighteous. And when it talks about him reaching out, that's a reaching out that we don't want to experience, because when he reaches out in that way, then that's his wrath coming on us. Okay, but it comes on us because of our ungodliness, our defiance, our thumbing our nose in his face, and then our unrighteous actions and deeds. Okay, and then it says, this gets back to, it doesn't really matter if you're a Jew or a Gentile. Verse 19 says, "Because that which is known of the Most High is manifest in them." And so when we look up the word known, it's that Greek word nostos, which is where you get the word Gnostic from, which has to do with knowledge or acquaintance, something that is well understood, primarily though in the mind. Okay, so Gnosticism is all about the mind. So that which is known of the Most High is manifest in them. So if you live in your head, you already know about the Most High, and that is manifest, and the word manifest means, which is a Greek word phaneros, meaning a shining. In other words, that which is light is shined on something. All right, that which is apparent. Okay, that's another synonym for manifest. All right, that which is open, something that everybody can see and has seen. So in verse 19, that which is known of the Most High is manifest. It shines to those. It's apparent to those. It's open for everyone to see. Then in verse 20, it says, it expounds even more, because the invisible things from creation are clearly seen. See, this is all referring back to why everybody is equally guilty, all the way back to verse 18. And it also is talking about why everyone is equally under the wrath of the Most High. There are no excuses. That's the whole point. So when we who are people of the book say, well, other people are not under the laws, the statutes, and the commandments of the Most High. We are, so we're the chosen ones. Okay, chosen. Those laws, those statutes, those commandments are the very things that have condemned you, because you're not doing all of that. Point blank. So that's for the people who are called by the name of the Most High. For the people who have decided to come into the blessing of the Most High, they're told, even though that you did not have the commandments on tablets, even though you didn't have the Torah, all that stuff, I wrote it in your heart, and all that stuff, from creation. So that's the group of people that he's talking about. In other words, the group is everybody. Everybody's under the wrath. because everybody can see clearly even the invisible things from creation. Okay, so the invisible things or the unseen things are what are clearly seen. It talks about verse 20 also talks about the world, the invisible things that created the world. That's what it's talking about. That word, Greek word, is cosmos, and the cosmos is that which is orderly arranged. So in essence, what it's saying is that the order that you see, that's how you know who God is. Now, you can deny him all you want, but when judgment comes, you will remember that you already knew you didn't order this world. You didn't arrange this. Okay, so that's what he's talking about. So he says it's clearly seen, and clearly seen means to discern clearly. Well, what is being clearly seen? What is being discerned? His eternal power and Godhead. That's what the scriptures say. So the cosmos will tell you in a clear fashion about the eternal realm, the power of the Most High, and the fact that he is the Most High. That's what the Godhead is. That's what divinity is. So the very things that you see, the very things that come out of your own head, testify to the divinity of and the power of the eternal. And if you look up the word eternal, it has to do with that which is enduring in a forward sense and that which has endured in a backward sense. In other words, whether you look forward or whether you look backward, that it's that which endures through both of those spectrum, if you will. Okay, so that, and if actually it says see Revelation chapter 14 verse 6. So I'm going to leave this on the screen, but I'm going to turn to Revelation chapter 14 and read it for you. Revelation chapter 14 verse 6 says, and I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. Euphemism goes, that's everybody. Okay, so he's saying here in Revelation chapter 14 that there's an angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting good news to preach unto the people on the earth, which goes right back to eternal. Everlasting and eternal are the same thing. So that which was from the beginning is being preached, and that which is at the end is the same message. Okay, well, what is that message? It's the message of the power of the Godhead. That there is a God in charge, which is what many human beings will not surrender themselves to. So it doesn't really matter whether we surrender or not. God is. He is today, he is yesterday, and he is tomorrow. He is. The focus is not on he, though. The focus is on is. Yahweh, Yahuwah is. God is. So it says, because when they knew him, in verse 21, they didn't glorify him as the Most High. And when we don't glorify he who is, or that which is, that which was, and that which is to come, when we don't glorify the is, we become vain in our imagination and our hearts become darkened. What does that mean? It means that we can't see. Our hearts turn dark. That which was to give us light, if you remember in John chapter 1, and I'll read that for you also. John chapter 1, verse 1 says, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him. Who is the him? The Word. And without the Word was not anything made that was made. In the Word was life, and the life was the light, Light, of men. So when we deny that in our hearts, then our hearts become darkened. We can't see. And therefore we become vain in our imagination. In other words, the things that we come up with are just a waste of time because they're outside of the context of eternity. Okay, so that's what verse 21 says. When they knew the Most High, they didn't glorify him as the Most High, and they became vain, and their hearts were darkened. Now, this next verse is where we live right here and right now. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Our world is being run by people who confess themselves to be wise. And according to the scripture, they are fools. What makes a person a fool? Denying that which you already know exists. What is that? God. So it doesn't really matter whether you deny or whether you affirm. God is. But when we deny him, we become fools and we change his glory into images of ourselves. That's how we become fools. We think we're God, not God's, G-O-D, singular. In other words, we think that we are the eternal. Rather than being a part of eternity, we think we are eternity. That is the most foolish thing any human being can do. Because we change the glory that has been given unto us into our own image. We worship ourselves, and we do that in as many ways as there are things to think about. Anytime we have a thought, if the thought does not originate in the understanding that there is a God and I'm not that, then whatever we're thinking is foolish. Now, so what does eternity do? What does the hymn of the God do? That God, that Elohim, gives us up to our own uncleanness. And it says, through the lust of their own hearts. Verse 24 is what I'm reading from. Okay. So the Most High does not disallow that position, that state of our hearts. If we want to think there is no God, if we want to think that we're the ones that are in control of everything, we can think that. He'll let us do that. He doesn't intervene with our will. He will not override the will of a human being as long as the breath of life is in that human being. He's not going to do that. So that's why I know, and I'm kind of getting off, but that's why I know that you can't be scared into the kingdom of heaven. The only way that you get into the kingdom of heaven is you are loved into the kingdom of heaven. But trust and believe, just like there is a God, there is also that which is not. And so if that's what you want to spend eternity in, he's not going to stop that from happening. But you can't be scared into him. What I just said is not enough to scare anybody into heaven. And it's not enough to scare anybody out of hell either. The word that's coming is a very simple word. Those two things do exist. Well, how do I know that? That's what the Bible teaches. And I believe the Bible. If you don't, that's cool. But that's what I believe. And that's what I am teaching and preaching. Okay, so what verse 24 tells me is if God gives someone else up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, then I'm not of the authority. I don't have the authority to do something different. So if I give you a message and you say, I don't want that message, then I've done what I was supposed to do. Now it's on you. So now you and that message have to deal with each other. The relationship from that point is higher than my pay grade. I don't have that kind of authority. Okay. So verse 24, the Most High will give up those who are under his wrath and want to stay under his wrath. He'll give them up to their own lust, to their own uncleanness, coming out of their own hearts. And when we do that, we change the Most High's truth. Now, what the scripture doesn't say here, but it says it in other places, change the truth into a lie. That verse says who changed the Most High's truth and worshiped the creature rather than the creator. Who's the creature? We're the creature. Who's the creator? That which is eternal is the creator. We came from eternity. We're here as eternal beings. And when we leave this form of existence, we're going back into eternity. So we can pretend that that's not the case all we want to. We didn't set this system up. Some other entity did. Okay. And so that's what the apostle Paul or Shaul is teaching the Romans. Really what he's telling them is, again, it doesn't matter if you're a Hebrew Israelite or a Greek heathen or a barbarian. All of you are in the same boat. It's just that I decided that I was going to use this particular group of people to be the point of contact between a heavenly desire for human beings and the human beings. But if the point of contact is acting out of my will, I can't save them any more than I can save anybody else. You got to do what I tell you to do. That's the point. Okay. So I think, yeah, that's what we have for this lesson. The Father bless you and keep you. The Father make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Father lift up his countenance upon you and give you his shalom.